Hey everybody. It looks like I had like a whole intro set to so when I hit the thing it was supposed to like play and apparently I did it wrong yet again, and that's a part of this learning process. So the next person I have is Rachel Garard, and I hope I'm saying that right. So I actually have a little thing I am going to attempt to read about her. All right. Uh I think y'all know her by Rachel Norcross. But her real name, Rachel Garard. All right, so she brings a professional expertise and scientific training to the table in this regard. She had a sighting 24 years ago, an encounter that left a lasting impression, and it quietly shaped her curiosity for decades. For the past 4 years, she's been privately researching the Bigfoot phenomenon, and over the last 2 years, she's taken that research into the field, applying a disciplined, evidence-based approach. And what's important about her is professionally, she's worked as an industrial hygienist for over 20 years. She's a certified industrial hygienist, certified safety professional, and a registered professional in SDS. And I'm going to have to ask her what that is. I got that from the LinkedIn page. And label authoring. So her extensive experience includes disaster response, environmental assessments across more than 30 states, including critical work following Hurricane Katrina and Deepwater Horizon oil spill, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So her academic background includes degrees in geology, biology with an emphasis in genetics and microbiology, giving her a solid foundation in the biological and environmental sciences. So, bringing that into perspective, I'm going to bring her up now because I know I butchered every bit of that. Hello, Rachel.
Hi.
Did I say
Thank you
the
so
name
much.
right at least?
Nobody gets my name
Gerard,
right. So it's pronounced Gerard, but
of
not spelled
course.
that way at all. Very
I feel
confusing,
defeated.
especially in Montreal. They had no idea what to do with my last name there.
Mhm.
So
Well, so yeah, you're in a unique position having
very
all of the what degrees specifically do you have? Uh-oh. Okay, there you go.
sure. Degrees specifically Bachelor of Arts, microbiology or
Mhm.
microbiology, and then Bachelor of Science in both geology, general route, and then also Bachelor of Science in biology with an emphasis on genetics. And I achieved that over the course of about 6 years. There's a lot of overlap between the 3 degrees, but I started out in the Division of Biological Sciences, decided to add the microbiology degree, and took as an elective a natural disasters and earthquakes course. Had an opportunity to get more involved with geology, added the major, and felt right at home. And ultimately, that's what brought us here today. It was as a geology student that I had my encounter.
Really? What were you doing?
This was when I was still a
Oh,
student.
we're jumping right in. Go.
Yeah,
Go.
I right. So one of my earliest classes was with paleontology, and the professor noticed that unlike most of the students who were falling asleep, I was paying attention, but more so, I was also catching his jokes and laughing, and so that stood out. And he approached me after the class toward the end of the semester and said, "Hey, every year we have a field studies courses, a series of courses where students are out in the field learning land navigation. They're learning how to map. Um, I don't expect you to take this yet since you've just added the geology major. However, I do need some help from an orderly standpoint." So the position was field orderly. I was there to support the students, do anything that needed to be done around the camp, including vehicle maintenance, running those into town, any type of repair work that needed to be done. So basically, while the students were on their field mapping exercises during the day, I would have the run of the camp to myself out in the mountains in Colorado. I thought that was great. Housing was provided by the university. I was sharing the staff cabin with the teaching assistant. So I was really on my own for most of the days out in the mountains. And where it got interesting, there are two courses that would run back to back at that point in time. This was 2001, and the first course ended, and there's a break in between, and typically the students would celebrate ending one course, about to start the other course. The thought was a group of us would summit a nearby mountain. And I thought that sounded like a good idea. I joined 3 other students. So we are in process of going up the mountain. And on the way up there, of course, I'm finding scat everywhere, which, having the biology background in addition to geology, I thought this was interesting. I was noting everything I was finding. And we're getting pretty close to halfway, and I started to see some scat that I didn't recognize. I thought it was unusual. It looked similar to some of the bear scat that we'd been seeing, in that the composition seemed to be similar, local berries and things like that. But the shape was a little odd. It was, looked more like a cow pie, and I knew well that there were not cows on this mountain. It was just interesting and unusual. And I remember very clearly making some type of a joke. It's like, well, I'm in the Division of Biological Sciences as well. I could take a DNA sample and have it analyzed for Bigfoot. Ha ha ha. We're all laughing in good fun. Shortly after this, I start to feel pretty unwell, and I'm assuming it's altitude sickness. So, we get to the point where we're at a pretty decent overlook, and I know exactly where I'm at relative to the camp. I don't feel that sick, but I'm thinking that, well, if it is altitude sickness, the best thing to do is to go down in elevation so it doesn't continue to get worse. And, I told everybody else, nobody needs to stay with me. I'm fine. I know how to get back. Go on ahead. I don't want anyone else to miss a chance to summit on my behalf. So I took a quick break. I left my backpack on a rock, and, this started a personal rule of mine to never leave my backpack on a rock ever again. I only walked 20 or 30 feet away from the backpack, took a couple of pictures from that vantage point. It was nice. I could, see some of the surrounding area that I hadn't been able to because I just hadn't been up that high. And go back to where I thought the rock was with my backpack on it. I can't find my backpack anywhere. It's not there. It's not where I thought it was. And then I'm like, maybe I'm more disoriented than I thought I was. I blew probably 20, 30 minutes trying to find my backpack. I didn't want to leave without it. It was, that would have not been a good thing to try to replace. And it gets to the point where I'm getting pretty upset, but then suddenly it was there, and I'm, okay, that's interesting. So I've lost a little bit of time. I really do want to get down in elevation, and rather than take the longer route up that the group of us took, I decided to take a shortcut, which, hindsight, I would never do that again. So I'm going a little bit off the established trail that we took up there. There's not really a trail on this mountain per se. And I end up on the wrong side of a saddle inadvertently. I know exactly where I am, but it's not where I intended to be. And I get to the point where I'm in a field that has boulders that have fallen from the surrounding cliffs on 2 sides, all limestone deposits. So pretty rough. You don't want to come into contact with it. You can rip up your clothes or something like that. And I'm standing in these boulders, and I look down and I realize there's a creek that switches back not once, but twice between the 2 cliffs. So I'm going to have to cross the creek not once, but twice. Really don't want to do that. Don't want to get my boots wet, for one thing. But also, there's I would be crossing a creek by myself. So I'm just sort of milling about in this field, not knowing what to do. I don't want to go back up. I was running pretty low on water at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And then I hear this rock hitting a rock, and I immediately look off to my left, and I see this figure standing on the edge of the cliff looking down at me, and it waited for me to see it. And then as soon as I saw it, it moved back away from the cliff edge to the point where I could no longer see this creature. And it didn't meet the description of anything that I was familiar with, consistent with what you would describe as a Bigfoot. It didn't have the ear outlines of a bear. And the thing that gets me, I've tried so hard to rationalize, well, what could it possibly have been other than that? The movement, just so fast. it's I can't really explain it. Just the biomechanics of it was so unusual and fast, and it was as if my brain couldn't keep up with the frame rate of what I was seeing. It could move that quickly,
Mhm.
and I immediately felt vulnerable. And I've run into animals many times. I've been a part of threatened and endangered species surveys in the U.S. and Australia. Um, I'm a scuba diver. I've seen large sharks. I had to evade bulls at some point during some of the surveys I was doing in Australia because I had to get a GPS reading before I could move for whatever frog or snake it was that I was trying to document. So, never been afraid, but I was in this case, and it was just a deep. There's a good chance I may not be making it back to camp. This thing knows where I'm at. I don't know where it is anymore. And I estimated that it would probably be 1 to 2 minutes max before it had, with the speed that I could see, get down to where I was if it needed to be there. But also I felt that I could be at risk of being hit with a projectile. This was something that could throw rocks or something like that. And in hindsight, I was in this field with a bunch of boulders in it. Who knows where some of those rocks came from? Maybe this was an area that used for hunting. I have no idea. But at that point in time, I made an immediate beeline to get back. There was no question I was crossing the creek. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, do not run, do not run, do not run. It just seemed like that would be the wrong thing to do. So I just walked directly so it was apparent that I was leaving the area. And I didn't want to look behind me. I just had a feeling I was being followed, and I was afraid to look back what I might see. I just felt I was being pursued. Eventually, I made it back to the camp. I told a couple of the other students who were not on the attempt to summit the mountain that day, hey, I think I saw a Bigfoot. And they thought this was hilarious. They just started laughing. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, well, I really felt like I was in danger. And it's one of the few times I've ever felt like that with all of the encounters I've had. So I never spoke of it after that point it was until 2021. I finally opened up. My spouse had no idea that I went through this. And yeah, so having that experience where I saw something that I cannot explain. There were several other things that happened in camp that there was always a background explanation or an alternative that made more sense. Could have been a bear. We did have something that was circling our cabin, the staff cabin at night, that started about a week after the fact. Neither of us had the nerve to see what it was. In hindsight, that's unusual. If I really thought it was a black bear, I would have been at the window looking. But we would hear the steps around the cabin at night, and both of us would basically be almost a fright response. We'd turn off all the lights, not move at all until whatever it was gone. And something tore up the camp. I could tell you what day it is. I actually did have a journal at that point in time. I think it was this happened when my sighting happened on June 10th, and I think the camp was torn up the night of the 15th. And after the 17th is my last journal entry, because I was making these journal entries at night, and that's when we started having the nighttime activity around the cabin. So the journal entry stopped because we didn't have the lights on. But yeah, and that was my first year out at that particular location and area. I was out there for 3 consecutive years following that, but that was the only year that I had an encounter and had the activity. I would say the other years were more or less normal from that standpoint, but really left a lasting impression on me. And there's not a day that goes by now that I don't probably recall that event. So it's a bit personal, and in the meantime, I have the science background, and it's such a frustrating place to be, to not have the validation, the acknowledgement that these are out there. What are they? I mean, I'm dying to know what they are. I'd love to see the detail of what they look like up close. I really only saw a silhouette. I could tell what I was seeing was covered in dark hair, but couldn't see any of the detail before it vanished away from the cliff edge. And yeah, I just want to know more. So
You just said that you could only tell that it had dark hair. That's what you said.
Mhm.
Because that was one of my questions. I was like, all right, let's start at the beginning. Give me your description. So dark hair, but you also said, and I guess to put this into perspective for those who were thinking, you saw it, why can't you describe it? You also said it was moving at such a rate that your brain was having a hard time comprehending the speed.
Very difficult to keep up and track the movement.
So that right there would be a key indicator of why you're not picking up on being able to describe everything other than dark, right?
Right. Right.
You're in the middle of trying to comprehend everything. Not. I mean, we see the same thing in crime scene when someone points a gun at them, and you got the rookie officers saying, "Give me the description of the person," and they're like, "They had a silver gun. It was a revolver," and they're like, "Yeah, but what they look like?" And they're like, "I saw a silver gun." That's what they were focused on. You get that tunnel vision, and you only have so much time to absorb that information, right?
Right.
So
My priority at that point in time was I'm going to make the best attempt I can to get back to camp. I felt vulnerable and I needed to get out of that area.
I am curious on when you were talking about your vulnerability about you mentioned something about actually occurring in your mind that this thing could possibly throw something. And I was wondering how, I think you said like be able to throw a projectile. And I was wondering how, like, that's not a normal thought, I don't think, for people
No,
who.
it's not.
Oh my God, you throw something at me? I mean, that's not a normal thing, right?
Well, I was seeing something with long arms, and my immediate thought is, and I just heard a rock hitting a rock. So I knew that it had done something to make those rocks come into contact. If it can make a rock hit a rock, then I'm now at risk of having a rock thrown at me.
Right. Okay.
Right. And to this day, that is the most unusual feeling I've ever had when seeing something in the woods, especially at that distance away with a cliff between me and something else. I would have no problem seeing a bear or something like that. If a mountain lion had been up there, I would have thought it was fantastic. I wouldn't have felt at risk at all. But with this, I did. I felt very vulnerable.
What kind of distance are we talking about?
Let me see. Got a map. Trying to get a good idea of scale here. So I did end up mapping that mountain as the next year when I was a student out there. I'm going to see if there's scale on my topo map, pulling out the map from the class.
Well, while you're looking, what year was this? I can't remember if you said or not. How long ago was this?
It would have been 2001.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, June 10th, 2001. And I have my journal here that I had at that point in time, just in case I needed to reference it. But you know what? I will say this. I mean, yeah, well, and this was before I really started my career post-student in science with documenting everything. Mm-hmm. And I would say that this became very important later because it was sort of like a acknowledgement that it was real. I had something tangible that I wrote that day that made it real after the fact. So I would say for anybody that has an encounter, just write down everything that you can. It'll be important later. You won't know what's important until after the fact. There are things in the journal that I didn't write down, like the missing backpack from about the same location on top of that cliff. That was a direction I had been moving from. But I didn't put there because I didn't think it was important. And I thought it was a case of me being, more or less incompetent and leaving my backpack out on a rock somewhere. But later it bothered me. I was like, did I really lose my backpack? Or did it get moved and put back? Things like that. You never know what's going to eat at you after the fact.
Right.
maybe 100 feet from the cliff
100
edge.
feet.
Yeah.
That's not that far.
No, it really wasn't.
No. And kudos to you for being able to go straight to a piece of documentation and look it up. That's pretty awesome. 100
Yeah,
feet.
I thought it was a good idea. Yeah, here's my traverse when I was a student the next year. This was done in 2002, but the topo map
Wow.
of where I was, this was a field area later. So, yeah.
That's impressive. Um, someone posted a question just a second ago, and they want to know, given your scientific training and background, and I know we are jumping ahead a little bit, but I don't want to miss it in case some other people come up. But as far as documenting any evidence that you would have now, how do you think that that encounter and your training would change the way you approach the way you document things now, if you found something?
One thing I wish I had done is note the time, because I have no context of time when this occurred. I think I would have had a wristwatch on me that day. I don't know this for sure, but I know the date and I know a rough series of events based on what is in my journal, but I don't have time. I don't have
Mhm.
wind direction or speed. I don't have temperature and relative humidity. I really had no electronic equipment on me at that point in time. It was the only thing I had. I did have a film camera at that point in
Mhm.
time that I had on me, but nothing else. No devices. I did have water, enough food for a lunch to eat on the mountain that day. Really, no other supplies. Nothing to document anything. And in hindsight, having the ability to take notes, having a digital camera is huge, but also just having basic ability to document timing and what the weather conditions were like would have been helpful, I think, certainly.
Right. And I guess too, I'm getting this a lot when altitude, um, maybe, the type of terrain, well, was it more rocky or was there more vegetation? Um, were you on a game trail? Was that the type of trails you were using, or was it a man-made trail? Is it something people traverse a lot? Some more context, maybe.
Absolutely. And I don't have photos from that day because I was a poor college student with a film camera at that time. I wish so now wherever I'm at, if anything, I'm taking an overwhelming number of photos. Digital photos are, free essentially. So, and at that point in time, I didn't have a lot of photos that I'd taken on the way up or um, on the way back. I did revisit the site 21 years after the fact. What was interesting about the revisit, the particular area where I was standing at that point in time, and I'm looking at a picture of an aerial view of that where I was. There are no trespassing signs all over that particular section between the two cliffs, and it makes me wonder why. There was also a cave out in that area. So something that's important to note, the limestone cliffs, lots of caves in the cliffs
That could be
surrounding.
a reason for the trespassing signs right there.
Could be. But why did they restrict the no trespassing signs just to the boulder field and not at the cave locations, with the exception of one? There was one cave there that's very interesting that has very old fire staining in it.
Mhm.
And there was a no trespassing sign on that cave. It was singled out. So I thought
Do
that
you
was strange. And someone went to a lot of effort to take all of the boulders in front of that cave out, level the ground, and put in fill dirt. So there was no getting close to that cave without leaving a bunch of tracks. I thought that was fascinating too.
So you just called it a boulder field. Are there any boulders in danger of moving?
I would say so to some degree. I mean, they've settled into the ground from after falling from the cliffs in that particular location. They're cliffs on two sides, but and there's a degree of settling into the ground. Most of them had pieces of the boulder or a portion of the boulder kind of like under the surface of the ground where they had
Mhm.
settled.
I was
But
just
otherwise,
looking for a danger level, for the
yeah,
area
not
for
really. They weren't
not
really
really.
loose, I would say. Um, but if you look at that particular field, it just littered with boulders,
Mhm.
and from an overhead aerial picture, you can see it. So the terrain is very different there than it is compared outside of that particular field,
But
if
from
that
what
makes
you're saying, from what you experienced and saw, there really wasn't you felt a need to have all those no trespassing signs there for safety reasons.
no,
Okay.
no.
That's kinda
It
what I
made
was getting at. I was just looking.
not no, but that it really made me wonder what happened after the fact. The last year I would have been
Uh-huh.
out there, so I was the orderly that year of the incident, a student the following year, and then the teaching assistant for 2 years after that. So I know that, let's see, 2001, 2, 3, and 4. So 2004, there were no trespassing signs. Sometime between 2004 and 2022, there were no trespassing signs every 20 feet on that boulder field, and I wonder why.
Every 20 feet, that's a lot.
Yeah. And it doesn't make sense. There's no public access to that area as well. You have to work a little bit to get there. So,
Have you ever run across that anywhere else in your studies when you were out doing
no,
things like that? Just
no.
that one area,
Yeah, just that one area.
and it happened to coincide with you having an experience there. Okay.
Right. And
Um
I definitely felt like I was being driven out. It wanted to
Mhm.
see me. It made the noise, and it was like, I'm making sure that you see me standing here looking at you. And I knew I needed to get out. So,
Yeah, that was a key thing that I picked up on when you were telling your story is that it waited for you to see it.
it
That's
did.
that's intimidating.
It
That's intimidating.
it stuck with me. And whenever I think about this moment, I get this feeling in my gut that just, ugh, I almost feel a little bit sick. It's
Mhm.
and that is very, very strange, considering I just haven't had a fear response in other situations where I definitely was, um, at danger, so why do I feel that way about this one, and why doesn't it leave, you know?
Right. Well,
Interesting.
when you were originally leaving because you felt unwell, um, at what point, like, did it continue after the incident, or did it pretty much cease because of the trauma basically that you endured?
That's a good question. I know when I was kind of milling around down there before I had the sighting, I really didn't want to have to go back up to a higher altitude. Um, but after I had the sighting, I didn't care. I was getting out of there, and I don't
Mhm.
remember feeling sick at all at that point. I just wanted to get back to camp. I was going to make my best effort to get back. So,
I was just curious, we're looking at patterns and hearing other people's, anecdotal stories. Sometimes there's a sickness that precedes it. And I was wondering if that had anything to do with it, or you truly felt that it was just altitude sickness that put you in that position or some other sickness. I don't know. But I was just curious if it left afterwards or it stayed. But I'm guessing after trauma, because we'll see people who are drunk get into an accident and get out, and all of a sudden they're talking and acting sober, right? So,
but
certain things can sober you up.
yeah, absolutely. My first thought, and this is from going into the mountains before, for ski trips and things growing up, is, altitude sickness came into mind first. But we were college students. Everybody was celebrating the last day of class the day before. We'd all gone to Manhattan's, the local bar in Canyon City the night before, and I was actually surprised everyone wanted to do the mountain, summit attempt that Saturday. So, yeah, maybe I was suddenly feeling the effects of being hungover. What's interesting though is, um, going into the industrial hygiene part of it. What are some of the symptoms you might have after an infrasound exposure? Um,
Uh-oh.
what if there had been some low frequency exposure up there? Um, I can't rule that out.
Well, okay. So that was 24-ish, 25 years ago, right?
Right.
24. Okay. So moving on to today with more experience, more studying under your belt, because I know you didn't just get those degrees and just quit learning. That's not what happens with people like
No,
you. So
not at all.
no. So you have now transitioned, because I met you at the Ocala Bigfoot conference, and we started off having some good conversations. I had no idea that you had this. That's jealous and not jealous at the same time, if that makes sense.
It
Like
makes sense.
okay. Um, so you told me that you are now going out into the field more. You're associated with, I think, two different groups. I don't know if you're a member of them or you just hang out with them. You told me you pretty much do more solo. I guess I have a lot of questions now about that. After having that experience, you're now out looking for something that had that kind of an effect on you, or that experience. And now sometimes you still go out by yourself looking?
No, I don't go out by myself.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Um, so with some of these groups that you're with, given your background, are you having any type of issues with how you or the group is documenting things, or attributing different, what may be pieces of evidence, but using like confirmation bias, if you will, to move into an entire different direction? I know I'd said a lot right there.
You did,
So
but
go.
so, I've learned that I really like to go out with individuals that will point things out that are interesting, but also come up with any possible explanation there to rule out, something unusual, if that makes sense. So in other words,
Mhm.
well, could these have just fallen in this way? Is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. Could this have been a hunter boot leaving this here? Where is it headed? Are there other tracks? What direction are they headed? I like it when I'm working with individuals that like to take measurements, that like to try to get an understanding of what's going on, but do like to look at things that are just interesting because we're outside. Maybe looking at vegetation and identifying those things, and other types of animal remains or tracks, or things that are just interesting from just being outside perspective. If we get to the point where we see something that we really can't explain, then getting measurements and uh, photographing the context. So far I've had pretty good luck with the groups that have invited me to come along. I would like to have more experience accompanying groups as well. Now that I'm putting myself out there as maybe a
Yeah, it's
potential
too late
resource.
now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Now that I'm willing to talk about it, and maybe offer some perspective on, well, maybe if there's a secure area somewhere where that the public can't get to, can we set up monitoring equipment to monitor sound? Maybe some wildlife acoustic data logging. Looking at other things, non-ionizing radiation exposure. So what could be there?
Right.
So
All things that also cost money and know-how, right?
right.
Um, so there's that. And I know we're going to have to start small, honestly, with introducing those types of things to the researchers. But I think you're on a right track with being with the people who you're getting them to question everything and not automatically assume. So when you have something like what you described as the branches falling, and you ask the question, could they have fallen in this placement? What do you do at that point once you decide that it could have? Is it an automatic exclusion and move on, or is it a document for maybe further patterning should it arise?
Document it anyway.
Okay.
I think patterning is useful. I think some of
Mhm.
the observations that are made, maybe there is an alternative explanation, but some things are subtle, and when you compile all of the notation and evidence and occurrences, maybe there's something there, that points to something unusual.
Right.
So
And but you would agree it's going to be tough at this point too, with the limited knowledge we have on trying to figure out what we include in the data uh for our interpretations, I guess you would say, versus what you, I mean, if you include everything, it's garbage in, garbage out. How do we determine, are we using statistical models to figure out how to get rid of, or to a certain degree, like where are we at, do you think, for being able to accomplish something like that?
well, for one thing, I really appreciate what you are doing. Um, I've been watching your videos. I've read your book. I think that encouraging the community to have more rigor in their documentation and making sure that it's clear to someone who may not be present in the field work to have a full understanding of what's going on is incredibly important.
Mhm.
Having the measurements in place, knowing how to collect casts in a way to preserve the detail, documenting prints on vehicles. One thing that I've noticed following groups online is accounts of vehicles maybe being disturbed in the night, being shaken or touched, or maybe they'll find prints after the fact. Knowing how to document that evidence is going to be really important, because that could capture something that really helps to provide a case for, hey, there is something out there. Because if you have a handprint and maybe a photo without other information, or maybe the photo's taken in a way that distorts what the print or image looks like, then, well, I mean, it's one of another 100 photographs of something that could have easily been a human handprint. We don't know. Um,
Yeah, and I think I'm with you on collect all. Um, what I would like to see more of, and I know this is a hard ask, and you're very well aware. Excuse me, you're very well aware in your career that um, there's always a system of checks and balances within science, and especially for me, with taking stuff to court, I'm going to have tech reviews, I'm going to have verifications, I'm going to have peer reviewed items,
right.
checking all my work. And one of the problems that I'm seeing now is if we get anybody in a scientific way, they're taking that person's word as a gospel, and it's becoming an issue. So I would like to see all the data taken, but I would like to see more context, and I would like to see more transparency. That way, more of us can take a look at it. And not, I mean, I know a lot of us, not us, I'm sorry, that includes me when I say us. I know a lot of people out there that they don't care about any of the stuff that we're talking about. They're out there to have fun, have an experience, and that's fine as long as we don't step over that line and call it something that it's not. Um, so I think there's a hard ask for some of us that want to go more into the research side, because like the hands on a car, I would like to know more about not just the hands on the car, not and the context of where the car was, but I'd like to know the activities that led up to said car being in that
Right.
spot. What were y'all doing during the day before that happened? All those kinds of things that could be useful to that we could pattern later, instead
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
a whole bunch of horrible pictures, saying I couldn't get the right angle. So we moved the camera, which is absolutely the wrong thing to be doing. The camera needs to be parallel to the surface, and you change light, not camera. But simple little things like that can change the outcome for photographs. But I think getting the word out to people about data, like you said, being up on the mountain, you wish you would have had this, the time, you wish you would have had a whole bunch of other things. But you're coming from a scientific background. So how do we get everybody else to do it?
I think some of it is interaction and
Mhm,
being open. So part of the issue with the scientific community is I think that in some cases, maybe scientists are too hard on the folks that are out in the field to a degree and immediately um, writing off what they're seeing.
mhm,
Wow, it wasn't this, not taking it seriously. S- the issue is that someone like me living in a neighborhood, I'm probably not having some of the encounters or the access to areas where events are occurring that we could document.
mm,
And getting to that point is going to require collaboration. It's going to require the individuals that maybe know where these events are happening to trust um, scientific involvement. In some cases, to know who the experts are and who they can reach out to. And I think one of the things that I've noticed in the Bigfoot community is everyone's very protective of their spot where they go. And it makes sense because you don't want someone to come in and potentially ruin a field site in some way, um, or undo lots of hard work that's gone into observations and years of coming into an area and maybe trying to develop a relationship with the locals, if you will.
mhm.
Um, and then you have homeowners that are maybe having something happen on their land. They don't want it to turn into a circus. They don't want to lose um, their credibility or confidentiality. They don't want people who are out there just to have a good time and knock on trees in the woods and make noise coming onto their land and trespass. It it's going to take somehow having a level of trust and cooperation between different groups, different levels of expertise, folks that understand where to go. Um, and I don't think there's any one expert that knows it all either. Um, you bring a tremendous amount with the crime scene evidence collection standpoint. I have an industrial hygiene background. That's rare. Getting groups working together that include individuals that have different expertise and just trying to collaborate, I think is really going to be key and important to get really a nice set of really bomb-proof evidence that, wow, this is something unusual,
Mhm.
clear patterns here, things that are not maybe necessarily consistent with something else, but suggest that, yes, there could be something here that's doing this that isn't um, documented officially by science yet.
Yeah, that's you listed an awful lot of variables that we'd have to overcome. I mean, and that the big one, just like you said, is obviously people don't want their land destroyed and they like their privacy.
Right.
And I totally get that and understand that. I mean, if I owned a bunch of land, I wouldn't want a bunch of different groups hitting up my land all the time. Um, I
Well,
with
and coming
your
into it from an equipment standpoint as well. So if I knew that something was likely to happen in a field location, there's equipment I would like to set up. However, it's expensive. What are the odds that it's going to be damaged, lost? Can the public get to it? Can I trust that my equipment will be okay? Because I don't want to put
Mhm.
a $500 device out um, in a field only for it to be lost or damaged in some way. But understanding where to go, where you might be able to get reliable monitoring results is going to be really important. Having
What
having a recording is helpful, but getting the full spectrum of what's going on, having an octave band analyzer, being able to log the data so that we can really show that there is something here that's unexplainable and not can't be easily tied to something else. Mapping things out to understand, well, are there patterns here consistent with language, or is it consistent with other animals and species that we were familiar with, that we have documentation for? Um, it's complicated. Where can we have secure equipment? Um,
curiosity, do you have access to this equipment?
In some cases, yes. So, I do this for a living.
Hmm.
What I'm trying to do is make sure that I have a clear line between these are things I'm using for work and these are things I'm using for personal interest research.
Hmm.
I want desperately to help the Bigfoot community have something unique, but that basically means I'm renting the equipment myself or purchasing it myself, and
Right.
that's not easy to replace if something happens. So,
No.
and
Um,
you have to calibrate everything too. That's not cheap either. If even if you own your own equipment, you've got to calibrate it to make sure that the records are viable.
I
Um,
am very clear about that with the equipment we have in our lab that we have to do yearly. Um, Man, I did not know all of this about you. This is fascinating and amazing. Uh, it's like I have too many questions coming all at once, and it's an issue. Um, I'm trying to take notes on my phone with my little pen right here. And it's going too fast. I'm trying to pay attention and not do that. Um, so it sounds like you may have some ideas based off of what you just said for maybe some possible experiments. Is that what I'm hearing?
oh yeah,
Because you just
absolutely.
kinda outlined, like, some maybe previous thoughts that you've had, and that's okay, that's amazing. We're gonna talk about that later. Uh, so if you had something and I think Virax, I don't e I'm gonna have to get in touch with this person and figure out how to say this, say their name right. One of the commenters, Verax, they ask some great questions, and I'm gonna ask it too because I had already pre-planned it. If you had some evidence for what you do in your specialty, what do you think would be good, compelling evidence for you? And that's related to your field
Got it.
that you
So,
would feel comfortable with.
I just mentioned this, so this is where I'm going to go with it. If I had in place a data logging sound level meter somewhere where I was relatively sure I could capture a sound and get the full frequency of it, couple that with a wildlife acoustic logger, that would not only give me the full frequency of what we're hearing, a decibel level, but then also be able to map it to sounds that other species make that are known and compare that to things that we, see if it's really unknown and then go from there. I think that would be a great place to start.
I think that that's a underexplored area. I really do. And I that's perfect because one of my issues is I just went to the land between the lakes and you saw what happened there. So I'm not going to rehash all that. But I set out recorders once again on the ridges and, surround up on the ridges surrounding our property. Not property, but where our camp. And every single time I get something that could possibly sound like a tree knock, like right when I first hear it with my headphones, I go, "Oh my goodness." And then the the law enforcement side of me for what I do says, "That literally means absolutely nothing. What is wrong with you?" I get excited and then I tell myself it means nothing. And then I get like a little downtrodden and I'm like, well, dang it. And then you get some really cool sounds. And I think, but literally, I have no exemplar to work with, when we're talking about science. I have no exemplar. Um, I even, when I got back, I took my recorder down the street to see how much treble is this thing introducing, treble, bass, that particular recorder. And I went down the street, hit record, and then had my wife slam my truck door. I wanted to see, does the car door sound like a tree knock at a distance? And it did slightly. I was a little mad. So now I'm going to have to introduce more standards. So now when I go and I put these recorders up, I'm going to have to go back in the camp and I'm going to have to slam my truck door and record the time and everything to see if they're picking this up. Right. So now I got to eliminate that and hope that there's nothing else close by to the recorders that does that as well. So I was a little disappointed when I hit, like it was singular knock here and there, but I recorded some other stuff that sound like trees breaking and cracking and knocking in between. And then you're like, well, the trees are breaking right after a storm. So, the evidence side of me is going, crap. It sounds awesome, but again, unverifiable. And
Exactly.
what you're talking about is verifiable. So for me, for evidence wise, if I could get my hands on a footprint that's one of those stereotypical giant Bigfoot's footprints with friction ridges going all the way across that I could actually trace unbroken, then that would mean something to me. But patches here and there mean absolutely nothing to me. Um, and I'll tell you why at a later time about my bear research that has changed that. So, um, but that's interesting. Sound is something that's not really going full throttle. I mean, I know people are taking sounds and sending them off to sound engineers and stuff like that, but they're not doing what you just talked about. Um,
Yeah, the idea is to get something that's unique, that does not match something known, and you need specialized equipment really to capture the full spectrum of what's going on. And
Mhm.
it has to be a vocalization too, not a tree knock, because a tree knock could be, as you just
Anything.
described, imitated by many things that we couldn't necessarily tie directly to it. We could explain away. And what's frustrating about it is if you're dealing with something that has a high level of intelligence, they probably are not, they're probably actively trying to conceal what they're doing, to some degree. So they know what to do to hide from us. I think they're very good at it.
Yes. Um, and when I first started those recordings, I did this thing where I went to Cornell's ornithology website and hit up every kind of nocturnal bird I could find in North America and in my area just to see what kind of sounds. And then I discovered, which ruined everything, the typical mockingbird can be active at night. And I was like, son of a gun. I was like, even if a real Bigfoot was out there whistling and a mockingbird decided that it was gonna recreate this sound, now there's an issue.
Right.
And I was like, God.
And it's frustrating too, because there are so many instances of whistling at night that if you talk to the person that had the experience, they are sure it was not a bird and that something was there, and they were using the whistles to communicate, but the whistles can be explained by something else.
Man,
So
so I also discovered that there's a lot of birds out there that when awoken or startled during the night will let out a singular whistle. I didn't know this, but I found that out through looking through Cornell's ornithology website. And it's very tough to even identify species of bird because they let out a singular whistle at night when they're startled. And I was
wow.
like, well, for now on, my recorders, if I get any whistle at night, those are now excluded. I don't count them because of just the mockingbird and those startled birds. So I was like, great, because a bear, a deer, anything can startle, a sleeping bird. So I was like, great. So it's getting harder and harder to figure out what standards I'm going to use, and that's what I keep doing. I keep, more information I find, the more standards I'm applying to what I'm going to consider real evidence, and it's becoming more and more difficult. But I figure that the more frustrated I get, the more I learn that when I finally hit that one thing, I'll be able to articulate it so much more. Uh, than going, oh my God, look what I found. I can go, you know what it isn't, because I've studied this and this and this. And that's
Right.
why I started that bear research. But I think some standards need to be put into place, obviously. Um,
Well, and there might need to be some pieces of evidence that need to have something else in addition to that piece that help to form a picture of what's going on. Because I think in some cases the whistles are legit. We just, by themselves, we don't know, and that's the rub, isn't it?
right. Yeah. And that is the rub, because I know those other things, I now have to exclude it. Unless it comes with other context with what you were just talking about. But even then, I'm going to have trouble using it for other people unless I've recorded everything somehow, some way. Because just because I come and tell you that I had all of this doesn't mean that I interpreted it correctly when I was experiencing it in the woods at night. Um, and we run into that all the time with, even eyewitnesses. In the beginning, I was so excited in my career that, oh, my eyewitness just identified this person. And now, 21 years later, I say, great, I'll take that with a grain of salt. If that lines up with something else, then I'll be able to use it. But just on the face of it, I'll store it up here just in case. But it can't be just, I saw this or I heard this, because I can go and interview the very next witness and it's something entirely different. And they both had the same, well, not the same experience, but they were there while something was happening at the same time,
Right.
but they were
How do you
experiencing two
process
different
it?
things and interpreting it differently.
Yeah, and the problem too is recall, and the way our memory works. Every time you recall a memory, you're overriding the last time you recalled that memory.
Yeah.
So,
And what a lot of people don't know is, before I did this crime scene stuff, I've only been doing this for 10 years, but every time I do something, I jump in like 100% and I can't stop. But prior to that, I was specializing in interviews and interrogations, and I was a polygrapher. And I ran across this all the time with what I was just talking about. And I think sometimes when I hear people, even on like these podcasts, and people are telling stories, first they keep interrupting them and don't let them tell their story. Second, they ask all the wrong questions, and they don't call them out on the BS. It just, I think it's that a lot of the interviews are designed to get the information that you already want instead of just getting actual truthful information. Um, and I see that time and time and time again. And I wish that would change as well, because some of these interviews are insane. But I get it. We're trying to do something on, we're trying to entertain and have people, click and like our show. Right. So, I mean, I
right.
understand it. At some point, it's entertainment. Like, I don't really expect me to continue doing this on a regular basis and have a big following. I figure there's going to be some people that end up liking where we're going, but I don't expect it to go like big time, right? Because we're asking a lot of people. I just kind of went off on my own little diatribe there, and I got lost in my train of thought. Crap. So, evidence-wise, you've been out in the field. Have you found anything so far that makes you go,
Promising trackway in
okay.
Ocala National Forest. And what did give me pause after the fact, unfortunately, it was in loose sand, and it seemed to have been an older trackway, at least 2 to 3 days old. But looking at the measurements of the tracks themselves, the length versus width and separation of the tracks, very, very similar measurements to the Patterson-Gimlin trackway. So that was very interesting. Marion Gant was there. She did attempt to cast one of the tracks, and it didn't have a lot of clear detail. Unfortunately, I wish that it did, but
Not in loose sand.
no, it wouldn't have had the detail that I think would have been aha, this is amazing. But being there and seeing the dimensions and separation of the tracks, they were really further apart than I would expect a stride for a typically sized height human. That was useful. You need somebody on stilts to have gotten that separation between the tracks. So being out, seeing those things is, I feel important. I have seen some strange things as well, like in the green swamp area near, kind of in the Tampa Bay area. And it's nothing that you can really say, well, I know that this is coming from a Bigfoot type creature, but just odd. There was a group of us that were out, and we were going down a trail in a fairly remote area, and left. It seemed as if it was left in the middle of the trail. There was two pieces of bladed grass with a young bird that was kind of wrapped around the blades of grass, and it had sort of congealed organs, and the skin had been removed, and it almost seemed, yeah, it was weird. It seemed like it was left in the middle of the trail, like almost. I mean, could it have been
like a wrapped gift?
Right. That it was like, what is this? Did something leave it for us? Of course we all stopped and we're all taking pictures and everything, but yeah, did it strike us all as weird? Absolutely. It just seemed like it had been left there.
Going back to those tracks real quick, did they have that stereotypical they were in line with each other kind of thing?
In line.
Yeah, in line, like.
And continued for some distance. We think it was maybe a fire break. There was a space between two sections of woods with a long, coarse sand separation.
So I've been seeing a lot online about the Green Swamp and the Ocala National Forest. That seems to be a pretty hot spot. Is that what's happening there? It seems to be a pretty hot spot.
Both of those areas are hot spots, which is why the groups I was with were in both of those cases out and about. And hey, do you want to come out with this? Sure, I'll come out with anyone. If it works for me, just because it's interesting for me to work with others and see what they're observing and rationalize in my own mind. Well, can this be explained by something else, or is this truly something interesting or unusual?
Fascinating. So you live down there. That's like 6 hours away from where I'm at. I'm trying to figure out how to get you in my woods with your equipment. Right?
We've got to figure it out. You would be a lot of fun to go out in the woods. I really enjoyed talking to you in person in Ocala. So I think we need to figure something out.
Yeah, I'm working on some spots here. I've heard of some places, but like I said, I've only heard of some places. And the place that I had some weird experiences was a paper lease where we used to go turkey hunting, like 363 acres. And we had all kinds of weird experiences that I can't attribute it to Bigfoot. The only thing I can attribute to Bigfoot is I didn't experience it. My sergeant, who was a sniper at the time, called me and said, I just want to be on the phone with you for a second. And I was like, dude, what? I was like, come on. And so I had jokes immediately, as you can imagine, right? And I said, what are you doing? He's like, I just heard a long howl and it echoed through camp and I could feel it through my chest. And I said, well, where are you now? And he goes, by the fire. I said, get in the damn truck. I was like, what's wrong? He's like, no, because if I'm in the truck, then I can't see it sneaking up on me. And I was like, what? He goes, the truck has blind spots. So we talked and I joked on him, but you could tell if you knew this particular guy, he was a sergeant of mine for a long time. He's not playing. And the sound of his voice was completely abnormal. And we joke about it now together because we've had all kinds of experiences in that area. Unfortunately, one day I went up there to go do some scouting, and I discovered that the paper company had come and started knocking down most of the trees, and I lost 9 trail cameras that day.
Oh,
I
no.
had my ATV. I went riding through it just to see if I could recover some. I didn't even recognize which way I was going sometime. I was trying to go by the topography of the rolling hills because most of the trees were gone. It was so confusing, but we had so many things happen there. It was a spot that I got basically tracked from the top of a ridge, and I saw red
Mm,
lights, and we'd seen red lights there before back up in there. Um, we thought we were chasing somebody one night who had been stealing our SD cards out of our trail cameras, and
interesting.
while we were running behind them, uh, well, while we were running behind footsteps, let's put it that way, because we never actually saw the person. We heard the noise and we turned around and just started running. We were around the fire. We turned around and started running, me and this one guy. And we could hear the footsteps running through the trees. And I actually yelled to my friend, "How is he not running into a tree?" Because like it was dark and we had lights. I couldn't see them. So I knew, and I was like, it was so confusing. And he goes, "I don't know, man. Just keep going." So we kept going. And then
Wow.
out of nowhere, the footsteps stopped. And I can only describe what sounded like a car door slam. And it was in the middle of the woods, no road, no nothing. I'm not saying it was a car door. I'm just saying it sounded like a car
Sounded
door.
like it.
And because my friend actually says, he goes, "Are there any roads here?" That was the first thing out of his mouth. And I said, "No." And he goes, "Look it up." So I reached in my pocket, pulled out my phone. And I was like, "Nah, man, we're in the middle. There's no roads." And then that was it. It was over.
Wow.
And we still don't know what the heck that was or what it was about. But it was the same place, the red lights, the getting tracked, weird noises. I had something following me one time. It was hissing behind me in the woods, and I still don't know what that was. Um, I was turkey hunting, something hissed. It was loud enough to echo into the little valley. It sounded like steam being let off on something, like shh. And I was like, "What
Oh,
the
that would be
hell?"
creepy.
So I turned around with my pistol because I hunt turkey
Yeah.
with a bow, and I turned around with my pistol and I leaned around the tree expecting to see something right there, and nothing was there. And it unnerved me so bad because I was used to being in the woods by myself. And I got up and I moved. I went further down into the valley, and then I went up a long hike up this hill that I did not want to walk up because I just wanted to get away and out of that valley. And I went down into the next one, and I set up, and lo and behold, not more than 15 minutes after I brushed leaves all across me, I'm leaning up against a tree. I heard, and it's like in the same spot. And I was like, "All right, I'm out."
Wow.
So I was like, I was gone.
2
And
different
I was like,
spots. You have the
yeah,
hissing
I,
one.
I was like, I was like, I'm leaving. And it became a thing behind me on a regular basis until I got camp. And I still don't know. I looked up and I found out that certain female turkeys can hiss, but there's no way. I listened to it on Cornell's website. There's no way that it could have that kind of volume. So I have no clue what it possibly could have been. And it followed me doing that noise. So that coupled with the other stuff, that would be a great place to go.
Yeah, that
But
definitely sounds like a good
because we
place.
nothing that I can actually attribute to Bigfoot, just weird, strange things happening over and over and over again.
Gotcha.
So, uh, unfortunately, I haven't experienced anything. I haven't, well, that I can call a Bigfoot. I haven't seen anything, any tracks, nothing. I'm just at a loss. But I'm also just getting started with this. So hopefully,
I
so
tell you, I would love to see a clear track somewhere. And that's the next area I'm getting into is I'd like to practice casting tracks from my kids walking on things. So
oh,
that way I'm set up and ready to go the next time. Well, if I ever do see a nice track in one of these locations.
that is the best way to do things is to practice. Just like you have to practice. You don't want to mess up when you finally have like the thing right in front of you,
Right,
right?
exactly.
You're like, oh no.
Yeah, plus
um,
they'd think it was fun too, you know. They
oh,
like stepping and stuff and then trying to cast their own tracks. That'd be fun anyway.
Yeah,
So
we
it'd
have
be
a
good.
citizens police academy once a year, that we actually allow a teen, citizens police academy, and for them, we actually set up impressions, and they all get to cast their own shoe impressions
Oh,
and
cool.
bring them home, and so they're super excited, and it's interesting to see, the amount of different ways things go wrong, even after having explained and showing exactly how to do it, how things still get messed up. So, yeah,
Oh,
it
yeah.
requires practice because 'cause I'm like, "How? I just showed you, and I even gave you the right amount of water. You didn't need to do anything but mix it together for it." And I'm like, "I don't know how this happened." But, yeah, practice, practice, practice.
Yeah, practice for
Yeah.
sure.
All right. Well, I think we're unless you do you have anything else you'd like to add? Because I think we're about into it, I think.
Yeah, you know what? I just realized what time it is. I felt like we just started, and now I'm I'm
I know
realizing.
we're just sitting here having a conversation, and it's awesome, but I'm gonna have to call it a night, unfortunately. Um,
No, absolutely. And it was really a pleasure to be able to do this. Um, just setting this up within the last day or so. So
mhm,
I appreciate your time. I mean, of course, it was a pleasure to talk to you again. Um,
absolutely. I really
yeah,
enjoyed it. And I'm gonna be getting back in touch with you because I wanna hear about some of these experiments that you might have in mind and see what kinda cost it might actually entail to pull off. So all
gotcha,
about
gotcha.
experiments, all
I'd
about
like to hear from
experiments.
you. You know, which labs to use and what. I mean, already what you've been sharing with respect to supplies and how to order them has been incredibly helpful. So yeah, would love to have
Appreciate it.
some super conversation for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you as well.
All
It's
right.
been great.
You have a great night. All right.
You too.
All right. Bye. All right, everyone. That was Rachel. She's awesome. And I'm going to sign off now. And at some point, I'm going to learn how to do intros and outros. I think that's how you say it. I know it's intro. Anyway, y'all have a good night. Hey.